Good afternoon. I would like to thank you all for showing up. The topic I would like to talk about today is nature and health. How can nature, exposure to nature influence our health? I'm Plusquin. I'm a researcher indeed at the Center for Environmental Sciences, and I'm an epidemiologist, and I'm mainly interested in how environmental factors can influence the health of children. But today the topic will be a bit more general. I have to, yeah? Okay. So this is a picture from my personal collection. I took it with a smartphone. You can see the quality is not that good, but I took it 3 years ago. And these are two of my 3 children, the 2 youngest. And I remember taking this picture very well because as many of you might be familiar with, children can fight a lot, and they can. My children are not aggressive, but they have a lot of discussions, and they are a bit like their father in this case. But anyway, and this was during a holiday, and as you can see, they are not fighting. They were really in a good mood. They are really. They look like friends. They're hugging each other, and I really had the idea I have to take this picture because it's such a nice view of the two of them. But you can see on the background that there is a lot of green and a lot of nature. And this already gives us the feeling about, feeling well in nature. I think this represents this very nicely. And also, I also get this feeling when I look at the lyrics of the Big Yellow Taxi song of Joni Mitchell. I read that she wrote this song when she was in Hawaii, 1970, 50 years ago, more or less. And she was sad because they paved a lot of the area. They put concrete buildings, and her view was completely not what it was, what she remembered from years before. So she wrote some lyrics that I think, some sentences that are really nice. They paved paradise. You don't know what you've got till it's gone. Things that 50 years later are still very, very actual. There's something about a tree museum about DDT. But what I would want to explain to you is the feeling she had was being sad because the nature was taking away, the nice view she enjoyed was going away. And what I would like to show you in this presentation, that it's not just a feeling, that there's actual science behind it, that there is an actual link between nature, health, and feeling well or feeling having a good well-being. To look at the link between nature and health, I always think it's important to remember that humankind has been evolved for millions of years in nature. And actually it has only been since the Industrial Revolution that there has been urbanization. So that actually means that many of the physiology our body has today is still adapted to nature, not to urbanization. Although urbanization has been wonderful in many ways, there's more healthcare, sanitation, hygiene, lots of things progress, but still we have to consider that our body might have been evolved, has been evolved in nature, and that there are certain aspects that might be not optimal when we don't get a lot of exposure to nature and are always in an urban environment. Nowadays, at least in the studies that I will show you, there is an urban environment and there is a rural or a natural environment, but in many cases it is a bit of both. There is a trend of having more green in cities. So actually, if you look, for example, at the microbiome, in urban environments there is an influence from nature and vice versa. So I will show you lots of studies, and they usually compare rural areas, urban areas, but in fact I think sometimes there is already a mix between those two. So today I would like to show 4 topics, or take you to 4 topics. I would like to explain to you what the link is between nature and health. How can nature influence health? I would like to say something about nature on prescription. So actually, is it something that doctors should prescribe in their practice? I would like to say something about the doses of nature. How much nature do we need to be healthy? Is the type of green space important? And one of our works that we did recently, nature-based solutions for work-related stress. So let's start with nature and health, the link, and I prepared this overview that can explain how exposure to green space being nature in this case, how it can actually improve health. It can improve overall health, it can improve mental health. Those are the two main topics that we can see. So in fact, more exposure to green space leads to less obesity, better neurocognitive behavior, less psychiatric disease, less cardiovascular disease, less mortality. Birth outcomes can be improved. And actually the list is longer than this. This is just a selection. And in the middle, you can see the ways through which green space can have these effects. There can be, because there's less stress, there can be an effect on depression, more physical activity, more social interaction, more contact with nature, think about biodiversity, less air pollution and noise. So I will first discuss how exposure to green space is linked to health. And to explain this, I first need to explain, because I will show some studies, but I first need to explain how in epidemiology we study greenness. Because how do we define if somebody is exposed to a lot of green or not? Well, of course, sometimes you can ask a question like, do you visit a natural area a lot? But actually, a lot of the studies rely on a technique where they look around a certain location and they want to calculate how much green space, how much nature is around a certain location. That can be a home residence. Imagine your home, and if you want to calculate if you are exposed to a lot of green, and when there's a lot of green in your surrounding, well, a big part of the day you will have exposure to green. Now, to make these calculations, there are more or less three ways to do this. There's a normalized difference vegetation index that's actually based on satellite images. And these satellite images are actually used. Okay. So no introduction anymore, but okay. So the satellite images, they compare actually how much of infrared light, which is something that vegetation reflects a lot. Infrared light is not taken up by plants. It is reflected. And they compare it to red light, because for photosynthesis, plants need red light. And actually, of the red light, they will absorb most of it and only reflect a small part. When you have not green vegetation or other areas, you can see that this balance is completely different. So based actually on the ratio between the visible and red and infrared signal, you have an idea about how much vegetation there is. With that, you can make maps. If you have a satellite images, you have both red and infrared, you can create a map. It's the same with some pictures. There are flights where high-resolution pictures are taken, then they look at how much green can they see, and also landscape use. Of course, you can also look at how much in this area is park, where does the park start, and are there trees? You can also look at other maps for this. So the idea is to make a map, and that's what you will see in most studies, that there is a map in which a buffer is being made. Now, it's not very clear, but here is the center of the map. This is a map with green, and here is a circle, so a buffer. And most studies actually, they have the residence, so the house or the school or any address. They have it in the middle, and they draw a circle around it of 100 meters, 200 meters, can be 5 kilometers. You're not all in the metric system, are you? But you get the point, yeah. So a circle, and then you get an amount of greenness based on the maps that you created. So once you know this, we can look at some data. Now, this is actually one of the largest studies. It's in the UK, and it was based on the records of the country, and actually they used more than 300,000 data points, and they used the individual mortality records. So they looked at mortality, how many deaths occurred, and then they coupled this mortality rate. They coupled it to how much green is there in this person that died in the area, in the ward where this person lived, and then they made 5 groups of greenness. Group 1 being having a low amount of green, group 5 being a lot. And these are, because in epidemiology we work a lot with odds ratios, and mainly you have to interpret them as 1, there's no effect, below 1, there's less, and above 1, there's more. So in this case, you can immediately see they are below 1, which means less mortality when you have more, when you are a group higher, when there's more exposure. So what this study showed, there's more mortality, there's less mortality when there's more green space. Yeah.
So how do you segregate out the effect of socioeconomic differences? Because usually wealthier people are closer to green space.
Exactly. So the data that you see here, they're modeled data. And when you model data, you can take into account socioeconomic class, you can take into account age, the gender. In this case, deprivation, population density, they took into account lots of variables that actually makes sure in one way or another that it's not because of these factors. When you add them to the model, you account for them, you know the variation explained by those variables is not what you see here. So in most studies that I will show you, I didn't always put all the confounders here, but these studies should be corrected or they're not interpretable. So in this case, because they took into account many variables that can also explain what you see, we believe that mortality and green space in this case are linked. So that's a rather big study, but there are plenty. There's a multitude of studies, and this is a short time study. You can see here that there are 36 adults, so you can immediately see from a big study to a smaller study. They were 36 females that visited natural forest area, a park, or a city. And there were 15 minutes of sedentary viewing and then also 30 minutes of walking. So quite a nice program, at least when you go to the forest and park, apparently. Because what did they do? They measured blood pressure. They had monitors of blood pressure, and they measured heart rate variability. Now, heart rate variability, it's an important factor, because when your heart is beating very regular at a certain pace, it's a good thing. Your nervous system is in a good shape when that happens. Now, when it beats irregularly, it's not. That means your nervous system is not at its best. So what happens? Looking at the blood pressure data, because that's what you can see here, the systolic blood pressure was changing here when they went to the city and to a park. And the same was seen for heart rate variability and heart rate. And that means actually that going to a nature area, to a park or a forest, is not the same as going to a city. Your system does not respond in the same way to a park as to going to an urban area. And also this is a study of one of our colleagues at UHasselt. This is a study on twins. And they also look at blood pressure, but they had the question, is it important if you have exposure to green early in life? Is that important? Or is it just how much exposure do I have at this moment in my life? So they had a study, 181 twins. And what they did, they had data about these people were in their 50s. And they had information about blood pressure being in their 50s. But they also had information about where they live in their 50s, but also at birth. They also knew where their mother's address was. So first looking at this side of the plot, these are the people that did not move, that stayed in the same location where their mother was. Looking at this location, you can see that these are buffers of green. These are buffers, as I explained with the circles. And you can see that when there's more exposure, when there's more green space, that you get a lower blood pressure. It's below the 0, so more exposure to green space means lower blood pressure. But interestingly, that's a nice confirmation of a theory. What we just saw, more green area, more blood pressure. But the interesting thing they saw is that it's not only now, but also especially where you were as a child or as a baby or during pregnancy even. Because when they compared the people that stayed in their, that moved early in life or later in life, they saw that especially that the early life exposure to green areas, that they gave the lowering in blood pressure. And the address of adult age in their 50s actually didn't mean that much anymore. That's an important one. This means that green exposure to nature for children is important, even when you are when you are an adult. Your exposure to nature still has an influence in later life. Now, this is something that we don't only see this with green areas. We also see it with starvation of mothers. You see it with air pollution. You see this effect, something happening in early life, having an effect in later life. You can see this with lots of factors, but also, interestingly, it also happens with exposure to nature. And then this makes more or less sense, to me at least, obesity and access to nature. When you are when you live closer to a nature area, natural areas, you probably are more physically active, and that's what we might see here. Because here, I will not go into details about all these because it's way too much for a presentation. I just put them here to back me up. But what you can see actually is that overweight BMI, the more exposure to green space around your house, the lower your BMI and the chance for overweight is. Also, interestingly, excessive screen time. The more green you have in your surrounding, the less the children have spent time on screens. Now, as I said, I have 3 children. It's an important thing to take into account because they spend a lot of time. If you just don't tell them to stop, they will keep looking at screens. So I think also this is an important result, that there is a link between green areas and screen time. It's something that I think more research can be done about. So I think I convinced you, if you were not already convinced. Nature is positive for health. It's good for your health. Now I would like to go over these 5 topics that explain how it can be good for your health. So let's start with air pollution. I think urbanization has been very good for many reasons. More for sanitary or for water. There are many good reasons why we have urbanization. But on the other hand, there are also some factors that might be a bit problematic. Air pollution being a very important factor. living in a city, having a lot of traffic, yeah, we inhale more air pollution. An unhealthy diet is associated with living in an urban environment, lower physical activity, increased levels of mental illness, and actually at this moment we know 50% more or less is living in an urban area, but we know this will rise. So we really should think about how to organize cities, and I can give some more examples in the end of the presentation, but these results should be taken into account when architects or city planners are doing their work. So this is for concerning the urban exposome. Exposome is actually, it is a term. It has been coined, I think, 15 years ago, and it's a concept. It means everything you are exposed to throughout your life, every chemical, every stressor, every physical factor, everything that toxins or biological agents that affect you during your life. And this concept, it's something that people want to do research like this. People don't, in our field, lots of researchers are trying to study not one pollutant, but in the best case 50 or hundreds or even more. And that's what this publication also tried to do. They had an impressive data set, almost 32,000 pregnant women from 6 European birth cohorts, and they were interested in the birth weight. So they had information about the mother, where they lived, and the birth weight. And as I said, they did not want to look at a component of the urban environment. They wanted to study many components. And actually, this is what the result looks like. It's a volcano plot. And again, the zero is again important in this story, because everything to the left explains what is lowering birth weight. Everything to the right can say what is increasing birth weight. Now, about birth weight, having a very low birth weight or having a very high birth weight, both are not good. You don't, if you get a choice, you more or less want to be in the middle. But actually, there's a lot of concern about low birth weight. Mothers that smoke, in the population of mothers that smoke, there is a lower birth weight. Mothers that drink alcohol, there is a higher chance for a lower birth weight. So lower birth weight is a lot of concern in the population. So if we look at what causes a lower birth weight, especially we have to look at what is above this line, because there is a multiple comparison correction. Yeah, there are things like PM, particulate matter, air pollution. Air pollution lowers the birth weight in the population. NO2, so again, air pollution. Building density. So these are factors on the left side, not so good for birth weight. But then here, we can see 3 that are highly increasing birth weight. And the higher they are in this plot, the more significant. Because you can see this is the p-value, the inverse log of the p-value, but it actually just means the higher you are in the plot, the more significant the effect is. So this NDVI, it is the first method of how to calculate green space. If you have more green space in the surrounding of your house as a mother during pregnancy, you have a chance for a higher birth weight, which is regarded as positive in this way. So also having a bus line close. Yeah, I was also puzzled with it. Perhaps they also describe in their publication that they're puzzled with some things, but this is the strongest result. More green space, better for the birth outcome. So in an urban environment, air pollution being not so good, and green space being good, we need a method to really measure air pollution. And this is something that has been developed in our group at Hasselt University. Up to, I think, 2 years ago, if you wanted to estimate how many black carbon, how many air pollution particles you had in your body, you had to use radioactive tracers. And of course, nobody wants to do that, at least in a big scale, or even individually. And they developed a new method when they used the confocal microscopy, so laser microscope. that can really nicely identify individual particles in urine. And this is what the images look like. They really light up these particles that are coming from air pollution that we can find in urine, and we found them back in the samples like this. And importantly, they correlate very well with residential black carbon. So just like you have a measure to calculate how much green is there around your house, there are also measures to calculate how much air pollution do you have around the house. And this is actually a good correlation between how much was black carbon was in your urine, and it corresponds very nicely to how much was in your surrounding. And we are now testing it also in green areas. Perhaps if I can come back and within a few years, I can show you some results there. But I think I wanted to show you because it's a nice way forward to study the urban exposure. Okay, so we saw this one, less air pollution. Also noise, I didn't touch upon that, but you can imagine noise not being the best for your mood. There's some indications also that noise in a natural environment is good, but I cannot show everything. So, and then the following one is a very important one: less stress and more cognitive repair. If you type in nature health, that's the biggest hit you will find is your neurological system, your mood, emotions. And there are two theories that look a lot like each other, but are still different. There is a stress recovery theory. Exposure to nature results in stress-reducing effects. So there is a rapid short-term recovery. So the first theory is really based on when you're stressed, go into nature, you will relax. Something that perhaps most of you experienced one day or another. And the other theory is has more to do not just with stress, but it's a bit broader and talks about mental fatigue. So your brain being overwhelmed with daily life, really getting rest in nature. It's not only stress; it's really the brain at its whole. So this theory, people are trying to prove it, and I also can show you an example of one of those two. Now, the first thing I wanted to show you, if we talk about nature and mood or emotions, is this. It's a big study also, 94 participants from UK biobanks, where they found 4% lower odds for every interquartile range increase for more greenness. I know because it's a different topic, I will be more general. I try to be more general, but you can see there are more specific terms. Anyway, it means in a big population, more green space, less depression, and especially, apparently, below the age of 60, this effect has been found. Below the age of 60, it was more significant, or even significant and not above the age of 60. Perhaps there's more stress. Perhaps there's more need. I don't know. And also more female, that bigger effect on female depression. Any suggestions? I don't know why. It's they're perhaps more prone to the good effects of nature. Then this is another study, and this is on children. The nice thing about this study is I've talked a lot about residential greenness, a lot about how much green do you have around your house. Well, this is green around the school. It's nice because that means that even if you, as a child, you don't live in an area with a lot of green, perhaps it makes sense that around your school there is a lot of green. At least that is what these people from Barcelona, what they proved. They investigated 2,600 children, say were between 7 and 10, and they did cognitive tests. So you know cognitive tests, it's computer testing. You have to remember digits, and you have to indicate very quickly on the screen what you remember. There are plenty of tests to really test your neurocognitive behavior that are suitable in children. Now, what did they see? That especially they compared the two types of schools. So the schools with low greenness, so more in an urban environment. They compared it to schools with a lot of green. And what you can see, first of all, and we see this all the time, there is an improvement goes up. It happens. In a neurocognitive test, every time you do a test, you get better. That's the simple idea behind the improvement. But the improvement is much higher when you are in a green environment. And the working memory improved. So for the society, this is a nice result, because that means that if we put money in making schools more green, we can already do something for children. And it's my opinion that children are very important because of later life effects. So this is one of my favorite studies. And then this is another study from also from our group, and it was a collaboration with Ghent. And they showed in adolescents from 6 to 12 that more green area around your house leads to more happiness. Nice, eh? It's not always, it's a very positive story. Eh? More green, more happiness, less sadness, less anxious. And also I put it here because it's more or less the same as the previous one, but this is an interesting one because they compared the groups at different time points. In 2012, so the youngest child was 6, they also visited that child 3 years later. So every child was visited in 2012, 2015. And they reported better happiness. The population, not every child, but the population, you can see in both groups, one being having a lower than the median greenness in their surroundings, and the black one having more than the median. But what you can see is that although they all said, I'm happier, if you lived in a place where there was a lot of green, you were more happy in comparison. So imagine that this line goes on, that in adult life there might be a very significant change in that case. So it's more than being born. Also during the early life there are effects. Okay, and then concerning the Neuro System, this is the last study, but it is published in PNAS, so it's an important one, not only for the journal, but also for what they found. And it's only on 38 participants, which seems a bit low compared to the previous, but it's not that low, because what did they do? They looked at rumination, so focusing on negative aspects of oneself. And they had a questionnaire, asking a standardized questionnaire for which they could calculate a score. And the other thing they did was took an MRI. So they put the people like in a hospital in an MRI, and they took brain pictures. And then what happened? They took 90 minutes walk to a natural or a rural environment. So they looked at the rumination before the walk and the MRI before the walk, the baseline, and the 90 minutes walks. Now, what did they see? Actually, here you can see the questionnaire data. So the people that went into nature, they reported less rumination. So they didn't feel as bad or as negative about themselves. This was not seen in the urban group. And interestingly, this is because when you answer a questionnaire, sometimes you get the idea that it is subjective. Huh? You go outside, of course, you think, you feel better, and you might have an objection of questionnaires. Now, what these researchers did, they backed it up with MRI data, with brain pictures. So what did they see? So it was in the questionnaire data, but it was also in the brain picture. And what they saw is that in the subgenual prefrontal cortex, which is an important location for mood disorders, there was less activity. So this data really backed up the questionnaire data. So they said there's less rumination in the questionnaires, but also that's what the picture shows. There was less activity. And this, think back about the two theories. So one theory being stress, the other theory more an overall relaxation. Well, I think this backs up the second one. That there might be, your brain might be more at rest, and get more chance to get to overcome fatigue. Okay, the next one is physical activity, and that makes most sense. When most people, when they go into nature, they walk. Sometimes they do exercise. There is this movement, green exercise movement, which it should be better. If you run next to a highway or you run in a park, the biggest difference is the air pollution. Because next to a highway, you breathe a lot when you run. You breathe a lot of air pollution. In a park, you have the same amount of air, but it's much cleaner. The noise is different, so you might be more relaxed. The view is completely different. So exercising in a green environment, I think it's a positive thing. Now, what also, of course, there are studies about this. So there is this review that describes the effects of green exercise on mental well-being. But it's a bit surprising. They made a harvest plot. Now, I'm not going to detail. These just represent studies. So these bars, they are studies. These are the studies in which they said green is good, green exercise is good for your mood. These are the studies that say I don't see a difference. That immediately shows that although we thought it was a very good thing to do, studies don't always back it up. Now you can already see that the low quality of evidence prohibits a clear interpretation of the findings. Now that's what the authors write. The quality of these studies are not always the best. So I think future studies in this case are needed. But it also made me thinking about what is more than physical activity. And I found a few studies that actually also showed that exercising in nature, specifically walks in this case, also had some metabolic effects on your body. So specifically walking in nature elevated adiponectin, which is for atherosclerosis, so the plaques in your veins or in your arteries that can lead to heart failure. It's something you don't want. So in this case, you get biomolecules that make it better. You get DHEA, which is also cardioprotective, and you have an effect on insulin. So actually, there is, besides the moving, which there is still a little bit of doubt about, there is also biochemical evidence. There is metabolic evidence that it's getting better. So it might not just be the activity, but it might be also the metabolic effect that we see with physical activity. And then social interaction, it also makes a lot of sense. If people go outside in nature, in a park, they're usually not alone. It's nice to be alone. It's perhaps what most people want, but especially in a city, if you go to a park, you meet other people. Also, this means that you can meet your neighbors. Otherwise, you might not know your neighbors. If there is a park nearby, you often meet your neighbors that might become your friends. So this study actually tried to estimate how much of the effect of green space on mental health is explained by physical activity or by social cohesion. It's a mediation analysis. I'm not going to detail here, but actually what they calculated is quite nice because of the effect that they see of spending time in nature on mental health, 22% could be allocated just to physical activity and 10% to social cohesion. This is, of course, based on self-reported health, so perhaps there need to be a better study, but in any case, social cohesion and physical activity are two important drivers. And also, this is another study about community cohesion, where they showed something about crime and nature. That's quite new. First of all, they showed that there's more community cohesion in a green when you are more subjective, like in nature, based on questions like how easy is it to get in nature? How do you perceive the quality of nature? So how do you perceive nature? That's more or less what they asked. And then you can see that an important predicting community cohesion was actually how do you think about nature? Nature predicts how your community cohesion is, your social cohesion. But then the crime thing, of course, there are major drivers of crime. You have deprivation, population density, unemployment rate. They're big drivers. You can see that the numbers are quite big. But then you have the same measure as this. How do you feel about nature? How accessible is nature? That it was actually 9 compared to something like 2362. So it's not the biggest driver, but there is a link between how much nature is in your environment and crime, prediction for crime. Okay, so the last one, the contact with nature. And in this case, I think you all know more than me. I'm an epidemiologist, you are more in nature, you study more biodiversity. So I don't have to explain that in nature there is more biodiversity. But having more biodiversity, it can be important for human health. Because it is very important for lots of species, but humans are also one of the species that are on Earth. So actually, coming to in more contact with biodiversity for humans is a good thing, and mainly because of the microbiome. So bacteria, viruses, small cellulary organisms. There is this example, and perhaps you've heard about it, the hygiene hypothesis. But actually, this is just data. I will show you something more in the next slide. But people that have a farming lifestyle, they have less asthma. Asthma is more common in an urban environment than when you are when you are closer to nature. And it's the hygiene or old friends hypothesis. Hygiene means, perhaps we are too hygienic. We kill too many of the biodiversity of microbiome in our surroundings that might be good for our health. But actually, the old friends, it is the same. Old friends hygiene hypothesis is the same. But old friends means that you have to get into contact with the microorganisms in early life. It should be an old friend. The bacteria that you have contact with in your early life can actually be an important factor not developing asthma at 7 or 6 or something. So again, here, early life, hygiene hypothesis, it's again early life that is important. And also for the immune system, this is a study of in early life, so I think it was in toddlers, that showed more animals, it's very strange, feces near house, animal feces in house. So I interpret it as animals in house. I don't see the feces. But actually having animals in house give you a lower chance of developing asthma, atopic sensitization, and gives you more reactive inflammatory proteins. So the environment, being exposed to biodiversity, especially microbiome biodiversity, is important for human health. And then there's also something that is called the microbiome of the built environment. It is a whole field, became a whole field of study. And it studies any kind of microorganisms in the built environment. So as the same thing as you might do in nature, you can do the same thing in a built environment. They saw lots of effects, negative effects, positive effects, but it has an effect, which microbiome there is on respiratory and allergic effects or on the immune system. And then there's another microbiome that's probably also heard about it. It's the microbiome, the human microbiome. In our body, we have lots of bacteria, viruses. We have actually communities in our body. And especially the most well-known is the gut microbiome. Lots of things have been published about the link between gut and depression. Your gut microbiome, so the communities in your gut have an influence on mood. There is an explanation. It can be like gut feeling or something, but there is a link between gut and the brain. But also the skin has a microbiome, saliva, even placentas that accompany children during in the womb. There is a microbiome there. So communities are everywhere, and they are playing a role. And actually there is a link between the external biodiversity and the internal biodiversity. So environmental biodiversity, so the more you can come into nature, come into contact with more diverse organisms, it can have an effect internally. So there is this example about urban and rural gut microbiome. So in this case, they were looking at the microbiome of the gut, and they saw that these are two rural areas and in urban areas, that there is more diversity when you lived in an urban environment. So that means that more diversity is a good thing usually. More diversity means you're more protected towards diseases or that you're more healthy. So I really think this shows that the environment where you are, it really changes your gut microbiome. So it is important that the outdoor microbiodiversity is not something not linked to health. I hope I can make this point clearly, because it is also an important reason to protect biodiversity in nature, while also humans might have an advantage there. And also in the skin microbiome, we can clearly differentiate in Finnish children here, a rural and an urban skin microbiome. So there is a link. In which environment you live, there is a link with your internal microbiome. And I also think it led to more, when you look at allergies, which have a multi-factor disease, lots of components are linked to allergies. The size of the family, the mode of delivery, that's also because of bacteria. But you can see that it should also have the component of how much was a child exposed to bacteria or microbiomes. Okay, so I think I made the point. There is a link between health and nature. Now, does that mean that we should go to doctors and tell them, if you have a depressed patient, please make a prescription, go outside for 30 minutes a day and go into nature, not into a shopping mall or something, or a street? Well, actually, it's a bit early. I think the benefits are clear, but it's a bit early to really already go to a doctor, but there are studies about this, of course. And this is one of the... This is a positive study that actually in California that gave advice to 78 parents, pediatricians. So their child was under treatment, and they gave the parents the advice. Please, the recommendation, they really wrote it down, is to go outside 3 times a week for at least 1 hour. And here is a map, and you can find all locations where you can go. They made 2 groups. One group that they just gave this information, and then they visited them back in 3 months. And the other group, they organized group visits to nature areas. Now, what was seen is a table, so I will not go into a lot of detail. But looking at the stress score from the moment baseline where these people got this prescription, comparing them to 3 months later, there was a lower score. So compare the 18 to the 17, and you can see it is a significant effect. So that means that just prescribing this, not giving actually something else, already did something about stress. Now, this was a healthy population. Of course, they had problems with their children. It's not that they were actually diagnosed. But loneliness dropped. The score they attribute to loneliness, psychological stress, they really measured the stress hormone, cortisol, and they could really see after 3 months, just giving this prescription, that things became better. Now, the strange thing is, that's what they also say paradoxically, the PARC prescription without the group visit, so not supporting them with a group visit going to nature areas, they did better. There's no real explanation, but apparently those people were very motivated. And actually, several doctors talked to me about that they needed more evidence-based studies to really prescribe, because they really have the feeling that lots of people, it cannot solve an actual disease, but it can aid, it can help. And lots of people are actually waiting for more studies like this to really try to use it in a daily clinic. And it should work like this, that there is a restorative effect, physiological relaxation, having an effect on the immune system. But to really use it, we need more studies. Okay. And then there is this thing, I don't know if you are aware of what it is. The forest, it's not Bob, it's forest bathing. It's developed in 1982. It's 37 years ago, but it's a concept in Japan, and actually the Japanese, I think the government or a department there, they coined this concept, and the concept is you go into nature, and like you take a bath, you absorb not water, but you absorb the environment. You need to do contemplation. You have to take the environment inside. That's what you can see these people doing, like not hiking, but like more like you do in a shopping mall, looking around, but then doing it in nature. And they did a study with 280 participants, and they had two designs, like just sitting and walking. Actually, they did sitting and walking in a natural area, in a forest, and in the city. And they could see that the cortisol, so stress hormone, the biomolecule that can really tell if you're stressed or not, that it was lower in this forest area. So that actually forest bathing does something. It can be a prescription. There are plenty of studies in Japan about this, a bit less in Europe, but it can be something that can perhaps turn out to be useful. Same effects for blood pressure, pulse rate, heart rate variability. So just quiet contemplation. Now another question many people have is, how much should I go outside? When is it a healthy amount of nature exposure? When is something, and does the type have an influence? Now, I selected 3 studies to make clear that about the dose. Although every study I read is very convinced that they have the answer is not there yet. So the first study I wanted to show you is it's 90,000 participants, but it is reported health, so might be a little bit of an error. They said 120 minutes a week is the best. You cannot really see it, but from here the association became significant, and there was still an improvement up to 240 hours. But they said 120 minutes. Next study said, so 1,500 participants, still not that bad. They saw, so here you can see the duration, less than 1 minute. I don't know how they did it, it must be 0 then. 30 minutes, 45, 60, same here. And they looked at how they reported depression or measured blood pressure. After 30 minutes, there was a significant effect in this group. Similar for blood pressure. 30 minutes was enough. Can you feel the difference? 30 minutes, 120 minutes? Then there's this study. This is based also on cortisol. So the stress hormone that we have in our body, it's actually very useful to have cortisol in your body because it makes you wake up in the morning. If you would have a very low amount, you would struggle very much with waking up. So cortisol is a stress hormone, but it has a natural function in your body. And normally it goes up for 30 minutes when you wake up, and then during the entire day it drops. It's also one of the reasons why you get sleepy, why you fall into sleep at night, because your cortisol is dropping. Now, when you have a lot of stress, cortisol is going up during 30 minutes, but during the day, while it should go down, sometimes if you're really stressed, it doesn't go down. And that's why it's named a stress hormone. If you're stressed, they can see cortisol being too high. So lower cortisol should mean less stress. Now, what this plot is telling us, so blue is the diurnal effect, so the daily effect from length of experience that you're looking at, it should go down, which is normal. Cortisol goes up, goes down. And the red line is the nature experience. And actually, they saw that this line, which is it takes into account the lowering of cortisol, it showed that actually also from 30 minutes you can find significant associations. So between 20 and 30. Just to make clear, I don't have the answer about the dose, neither have they. There will be more studies. But what I've seen mainly is the last reports, short but more exposures. Not one long in a week. You better go outside a few times a week, but like 30 minutes. That's what the last things I think might be more telling us. And then the type of green. That's very difficult, I think, because you have to work with what is around. It's difficult to compare a dense area and the not so dense green area, because you cannot really build this. It has to be there. So what a few studies looked at is actually what kind of open space is there. Local open space, not that big, compared to regional open space, what you're used to working with very large areas. And they had 4 categories: local open space, neighborhood, district, regional open space. So the more, the higher you are in this scale, the bigger the areas, and the more trees you have. Because in the local area, it cannot be the same as a forest. So what did these people see? That especially in the bigger areas, in the district parks and in the regional parks, those type of nature had the biggest effect. Although there was an overall effect, in this case it was on mental health scoring, there was an overall effect of the area, but especially the bigger parks, they were significant. So it might still, there might be an important link. Another study is here with tree coverage. This actually just, they had an index, how much tree coverage is there in this surrounding. And here they could clearly see that there was a dose-response effect. More tree coverage, better effects, lower odds ratios for obesity, higher blood pressure. So they actually showed that although it might work with a low tree coverage, the high tree coverage, dense areas, they work better. That does not mean that a small park does not work, but it just might work better in a dense area. And it's the same here. It's it's in Singapore 1,000 subjects, but they actually show to say more canopy cover means more effect. Not that it doesn't have an effect, it just means more. So the type of green, it matters, but not to the extent that you won't have an effect of a park. So if you have the chance, I think this data is telling you, you can go to a larger area, but if you don't have the chance, also a smaller area might already benefit your health. And then there is a question, I get that a lot, is it, do you really have to go, or can you just have a big sticker or a poster? Actually, I always think having a big poster of a forest, it's nice to look at. So, but actually, this study showed that looking at nature already does something. Not having the smell, not having the sound, not having the fresh air, just looking at nature. They had divided 2 groups. One group had to look at this picture. The other one had to look at this picture. They looked at heart rate variability, so how regularly is your heart beating? Meaning that if it is very regularly, it's good. If it's irregularly, if there's a lot of variation, it is not that good. And they showed that they give a stressor. They gave these people a test. They had to do a neurocognitive test. They had to remember a couple of digits, so they gave them a stressor. But they looked at the heart rate variability of the people looking at the green picture compared to the urban. And after this test, they could, which was something of a stressor, they could clearly see that the heart rate variability was better in the people that looked at nature. So actually, looking at a picture, you don't get the complete effect, but already does something. And also this person, Ulrich, he did the same. He looked at the hospital. It's quite a nice design. He looked at data from 72 to 98 at a hospital location, and he compared rooms where there was view at green areas and compared it to rooms that had brick walls. And he showed having a lot of data, remember, that actually the dose of pain medication was lower in the patient's rooms that has access to green. But it also shocked me, because you would think, this is just by coincidence, but it is a lot of data. Having it for this many years, they really showed a strong effect on giving less pain medication. People could leave the hospital ward early, like in a day or something. In general, comparing just nature view and looking at a brick wall. These might be in an individual patients. These might be small effects, but still having a view in hospital might actually mean something. And that's also what the Erasmus Hospital in Rotterdam. They are really. They really looked at studies like this, and what they try to do is make a natural environment around their hospital. This is the roof this is the roof where they really made green walls, green roofs, to really give people the view outside to nature. And then there is a question about what is giving the effect. Is it your vision? Is it the smell? Is it your hearing, auditive? Is it metabolites that you can find in nature? Is it microorganisms? And still those things are because also I get the question several times from people, this is something we don't know that much about. There's still a lot of research about this. But one thing that is a nice study method is virtual reality. In that way, you can really have the experience of nature without the smell, without the molecules that you can metabolize, that you can see, without the sound, or you can add them. That's what this study did. They took virtual reality in one case, and then they added some smell to the images. Then they added sounds. Then they added. No, they didn't add. And they add the vision, which they had, of course. But they could clearly show that only VR, in this experience, also could show that there is less stress. This is skin conductivity, which means that there was an important difference between an urban-looking environment and a park and forest environment. And it's not on the screen, but it's nice because those people showed that especially the smell was important. And it might be weird, but it's the same with air pollution. The olfactory bulb, so actually what is inside your nose here, is the access from air to your brain. So smell is an important one, and that's also, it's not on the screen, but that's also what they found. So if we know this, can we isolate some molecules from nature and just give them, like in this nice room? If I would just give you some phytoncides, would you feel better? I don't know at this moment, but there are studies in Japan going on about molecules. They explain not the smell, but they're actually metabolites that you can find volatile organic compounds derived from wood oil. And actually, it gives you more or less the idea of it's not the best idea, but if you cannot go outside, can you replace outside, inside? And that's what this study did. They just, again, look at VR, but they made the conclusion that still going outside is the best. If it's not possible, imagine in a hospital, people not being able to leave or going outside, then VR might be a solution. And then the last part, this is some of my work, together with the Environmental Economic Group at Hasselt University with Sylvie Daniels. And we had the question if it would be good if people at work, if workers, could spend time in nature during work hours. The idea is great. Huh? You can, during work hours, your boss tells you, go outside. And yeah, of course, come back to do some work. But the idea is, this is really work. Because we see all these good effects from nature, but do they work in a working environment? And what we did is, we organized a study with a treatment group and a control group. So the treatment group, they were allowed to go outside 2 times a week for 2 hours, and they could do a bike ride. So this was all organized. They could do a building of like crafting with nature, guided walks. So they had 6 activities during 3 weeks. And what we did lots of tests with these people, but also the people that were not allowed to go outside. We really found volunteers to do this. They had to stay inside, but they did all the tests. This was a control group, and we compared those 2 groups, so the group that went outside with the people that had to stay inside. And we did cognitive testing. So remember the computer testing that also children, you can do them with adults. And you can, so the purple one is the group that had to stay inside. The green one is the group that had to go outside. Now, again, with neurocognitive testing, most people get better. In this case, better is scoring lower because it means you need less time to have a reaction. So you measure a reaction with the strop test. Going down means better, less time. So both groups went down, but the group going outside had a much better selective attention. They're just faster. Their neurocognitive performance was better in the strop test and a digital symbol test. Here you can see the pattern is a bit more clear. The interaction effect was not significant, but the pattern is very clear. They became faster. And how do we interpret it? We think that if you go outside, if you get time to go outside, that you are more efficient. When you come back, you're faster. So it might not be lost this time. And it is important that we did not just measure the people after they did the nature experience. No, we waited a few days after the experience and then we did the tests. So it is a lasting effect. It's not an immediate effect, it's something that lasts. And we found the same for a burnout assessment in Belgium, but I'm sure around the world burnout is a common problem. It costs a lot of money to employers, to the government. This tool actually showed people that going outside, they scored better on this test. I'm not saying they had lower burnout because we need a big population to say that, but they scored better. Cortisol, stress hormone, they scored better when they go outside. And yeah, this is not so significant. But of course, you do many tests, and we saw clearly that they were more efficient and that they had lower stress. I think there's more research needed. Early life, I hope I made that point. It's because I study early life that I think it's important, but it is in a society very important. We need more molecular mechanism randomized controls, and we study them in the EnvironAge birth cohort. This is a study we coordinate at Hasselt University, 2,000 children, even more. We are following them up during their life. So they are born in a hospital, they are enrolled in our study, and at 4 years of age we do a cardiovascular neurological phenotyping. We have lots of samples from these children and lots of questionnaire data, so we really want to study the effect of green space also in these children. Conclusions, it is an essential element. I think people know like 5 vegetables a day or 5 portions, 10,000 steps. I think going outside going into nature should be one of those, at least for children. There is this initiative, the Green Hour. It's from 2007, but they said children should go out 1 hour a day into nature. I showed that there can be lots of positive effects. Effects can be demonstrated throughout the entire life cycle, so at early life, but also later. And these results should be taken into account for urban planning. And also here's a last example of the High Line in New York, where they, it's a very nice idea. Just instead of letting trained rails, they're like still using them, but then as nature. So I think it's a very nice example of urban planning. Thanks you. I don't know the time, but. Yeah, ladies first.
We are all working with the students and doing a lot of learning outside. Have you also taken a look at that, the effects of nature on learning?
It's more or less in the direction of the neurocognitive tests. We do it in the 4-year-olds. We measure their attention, their working speed, and that is a measure for learning. We don't have results. Others have seen that neurocognitive performance gets better, and that may result in better learning outcomes. Yeah.
So I had a couple of questions. First of all, at the other end of the continuum, in deeply rural areas and agricultural areas, we have residences in a lot of greenness, but we have a lot of problems with that. We have high accident rates with farm kids. We have high exposure to chemicals, even though they're in NDVIs that are off the chart. So I think there's a certain danger in overemphasizing the greenness because there is the other end of the continuum where there are many problems.
Yes, this is mainly in urban environments that these studies were, and not these situations.
So
that you
I am
described,
interested that whether those rural environments provide other test cases where you have outdoor life, greenness, but a lot of other different threats coming into play that are not in the sort of suburban or residential areas. The second thing is, particularly say in the southeast of the US, for our Black African American communities, living in greenness can, in many instances, be a highly threatening and almost panic-inducing environment. And we really have to be very culturally sensitive to how threatening those environments can be to those communities, and to recognize that, and to understand that for many of those communities, there's
why is it panicking?
For a lot of African American communities, being in nature is really a threatening environment. It's actually many of them are not living in green environments, but visiting or being exposed to green environments. I should be careful. As a relatively novel environment.
Because they were not familiar with it.
Well, it's more than that. It is culturally seen as deeply threatening because of a long-term generational cultural exposure to difficult situations in rural environments. So I think we have to be extremely culturally sensitive about what greenness means to different cultures. I mean, I know for us in Florida, our Hispanic communities and our African American communities have a very different view of greenness in many instances, and just have to be sensitive about that.
Yeah, I, at least as far as I can understand, I think if it means stress, that's the opposite of what this is saying. On the other hand, more exposure to microbiomes, bacteria, things will all still work on them. But of course, if there is a stress factor, yeah, indeed, we should, for special communities, be careful. Yeah.
I have a comment and a question. A comment is there's also blue. Yep. So water is also associated with these health effects, and there's a great book called Blue Mind by Wallace Nichols that goes through the data on blue. So I just don't want to think of it as just green.
That's very nice addition.
Yeah. And then I've read accounts of doctors in the United States in the 1850s-ish actually prescribing nature for patients, especially with regard to asthma and depression. And I wonder if you know about historical, adoption by the medical community, and if there's any historical data on that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I was not aware, so I don't know. But it's, of course, if there is data that's that old, it's very precious. Yeah, but I cannot comment on it. Yeah.
Well, I have to look it up, but supposedly I've read about this, that the New England Journal of Medicine in the 1800s was actually writing papers about the effects of nature.
Thanks. Okay.
Actually, in the United States, there were earlier attempts back in the 19th century. There was a nature study movement in the States. And they're really encouraged, and it was an obligation for small children to go out and in nature. And they really thought not only about health elements, that was also one of the reasoning, but also to be good scientists, etc. So they combine different things. And this is somewhat forgotten, but there's a very interesting literature, old literature on, and it was really called the nature study movement. So being active as a young researcher, as a child, to go outside and to become a naturalist for health and for cognitive reasons back in the 19th century.
That's Anna Bosworth Comstock. The nature study movement is Anna Bosworth Comstock.
Right. You can still get that book, although it's out of print right now. Well, so much of the negativity of high technology, or at least non-natural lifestyles, has been sort of, well, in two directions. One is that some of you will have read the book No Child Left Indoors, right? Yeah, where
The book is Last Child in the Woods.
Last Child in the Woods, okay, but there was another, maybe sort of a corollary to that. There's something about not being left indoors. Last Child in the Woods, but so it follows very closely what you're saying. The other comment that I wanted to say is that Hollywood now has sort of taken up the cause of super technology. I'm thinking, my wife and I watched a movie a while back entitled, I think it was Geostorm. Some of you seen that one? Well, where the problems of the Earth are going to be solved by this massive satellite that can change the climate on Earth, you know. I mean, it's so far-fetched, but salvation is going to lie in high technology, and the two main protagonists, plus the daughter of one of them, actually go fishing toward the end, and they sort of get up and give up on that and say, this is so stupid, this is pointless, to be outside in a healthy environment doing some fishing, or one could extrapolate to any number of outdoor activities, you know. And just think back to a generation ago with all the Star Wars things. You guys remember the planet that was all technology? There wasn't a green leaf in sight. There was all these machines and flying gizmos and so forth. And we are sort of really pointed toward high tech as the salvation and the future of our species. And finally, the old saying, we're not out of the woods yet, is kind of an anachronism to what you've been talking about here. Fortunately, we're not entirely out of the woods yet, and that's where likely much of future salvation will lie.
Yeah.
Thank you. One of what Bo was trying to think about was the No Child Left Inside Act that the government was trying to pass in the United States about 10 years ago, but that got derailed when we had the Depression. But a lot of elements of the No Child Left Inside Act were rolled into the replacement for the No Child Left Behind Act. So now the Every Student Succeeds Act is loaded with a lot of environmental education because of the recognition that we have an urban population and they're not getting that exposure to nature that they need. Now, I think with regard to cultural and different minority groups, I was a partner with the Ecological Society of America, their SEEDS program, to get more minorities into ecology. And my partner was a historically black college. And, one of the programs we had with them was to come and do some wetlands project. And they wouldn't go in to the wetlands to remove invasive species until one of the girls did. And then all of the guys rolled in and they had a blast. So there's some trepidation in terms of the fear of nature, but that barrier is easily broken, I think, with the right types of incentives.